Sometimes Ian Furchess hated being the Duke of Wolffhampton, like when he had no idea how to pay for his ancestral castle, which costs more to run than some small countries. Or when his grandmother pressured him to marry, preferably someone rich and titled. Ian hadn't even wanted to be a duke. So, when a beautiful American tourist landed on his doorstep, Ian was caught between his duty and his desire. He knew Daisy Wexler had her own agenda, one that could be the ruin of a duke. And yet Ian had had his fill of duty. It was time to indulge his desires. Ian Furchess, 11th Duke of Wolffhampton, was feeding pigs. The irony of the situation did not escape him, but in truth, it wasn't a bad way to spend an unseasonably warm February afternoon. The weather chaps were all a-twitter with record highs and warm air masses and the like. Ian chose not to analyze his good fortune. It was enough just to feel the hot sun on the back of his neck and to think about something other than his problems. An importunate sow brushed up against his leg, smearing mud across the thigh of an ancient pair of pants. Ian chuckled mostly at himself. Here he was, 73rd in line for the throne of England, communing with livestock. He took a certain pride in it, actually. It was his own personal rebellion. Ian had never wanted to be duke. But when his parents and older brother were killed in a sailing accident the year Ian turned 21, his life had changed forever. He should have been with them on that boat. Instead, he'd been charging with testosterone-fueled determination across the polo field, leading his university team to a championship. A natural horseman, Ian's dream had been to take the fortune he'd inherited from his maternal grandfather and establish a world-class stud farm. Instead, he now bore the sole responsibility for an aging pile of rock, a stubborn and imperious grandmother, and the future of the entire Wolffhampton progeny. To use an American phrase that would never cross the lips of a proper duke, life sucked. "Hello," Ian's head snapped up. A trio of soon-to-be bacon animals scattered. The woman in the distance drew nearer, her smile sunny. "Can you help me, sir? I'm trying to find the Duke of Wolffhampton." "This is his house, right?" She shielded her blue eyes with one hand, brushing away tendrils of blonde hair that danced around her face, and glanced up at the imposing lump of granite that Ian called home. Wolffhampton Castle was impressive rather than attractive, but it had served his family well for centuries. Ian sighed inwardly. "The Duke is not available. May I help you?" He'd pegged the young lady right off. Ever since William and Kate married, the countryside had swarmed with single female tourists hoping to snag their own fairy tale prince. He wondered if they expected to find royalty hiding behind potting sheds. Her face fell. She hitched her enormous tote higher on her shoulder. "I'm Daisy Wexler. I really need to speak with the Duke. It's a matter of some importance." Her accent placed her from somewhere in the American South. Ian's stomach clenched. "Concerning what?" The woman was lovely, dressed much like Gatsby's Daisy, all in white, a flowing linen jumper and a simple cotton shirt beneath. But she had added splashes of color in a strawberry belt and a jaunty daffodil scarf that fluttered in the breeze. She wrinkled her nose, a small frown appearing between perfectly arched brows. "Perhaps an illegitimate child, but without speaking to the Duke, I can't be certain." Bloody hell! Ian's internal radar blared a warning. At the rate his bank account was dwindling, he certainly couldn't afford to battle an inheritance claim in the courts, even though he already knew what the outcome would be. He and his grandmother, the elderly Duchess, were the only surviving members of the once prolific Wolffhamptons. That was a fact. As delicious as the adorable Daisy was, Ian was not about to let himself become embroiled in a fabricated claim to the lineage. "The Duke is a very busy man. Perhaps if you called for an appointment." Daisy's small chin lifted adding a hint of stubbornness to her heart-shaped face. "But I have called repeatedly. No one answers." "Precisely." Ian had disconnected the answering machine for a reason. "I'm sorry," he said, wishing he'd met this delectable creature in other circumstances. "You've wasted your time." Daisy was tired, hungry, and cranky. The flight from Charlottesville to Atlanta to Gatwick to Manchester had been interminable, and the subsequent bus ride even more so. The prospect of her first hop across the pond had excited her, but now that she was here, she barely had the energy to be civil. Perhaps she should have built a day into her schedule to recover from the jet lag. The subject of her current displeasure was well over 6 feet tall and had the hard, muscular frame of a man in his prime. He was wickedly handsome, with tousled chestnut hair and long-lashed hazel eyes. She couldn't, however, afford to be distracted, even if his blatant masculinity and clipped speech made her knees wobble. She almost never made snap decisions about people, but this boorish farm laborer set her teeth on edge. He was being either deliberately obtuse or obstructive, or both. Drawing on her last ounce of determination, she smiled at him with the cajoling humor that usually stood her in good stead. "Surely you could escort me to the castle, introduce me to his grace." The man narrowed his eyes, suspicion in his gaze. "Common laborers don't as a rule walk up to the front door and let themselves in." "Then perhaps we could access the house unobtrusively somewhere else. All I need to see, at least at first, is the library, and I won't say you helped me. As a matter of fact, I don't even know your name, do I?" Plausible deniability will work in our favor. "You Americans are so pushy." She felt her cheeks flush. The man spoke in educated accents, but he was dressed in threadbare tobacco-colored trousers and a weathered leather bomber jacket that looked as if it might have actually been worn during a world war. Perhaps his family hadn't had the means to send him to university. It was a shame, because he had a natural air of command that would have carried him far in business. It was possible he was an overseer for the Duke in charge of the property. But that still didn't explain why he was mucking about in a hog pen. She refused to let his comment dissuade her from her quest. "I like to think of it as being goal-oriented. Or are you a chauvinist who believes women belong in the bedroom and the kitchen and nowhere near the boardroom? I'm sure you could handle all three." His voice was smooth as whiskey, and he smiled for the first time as he spoke, a quick, flashing grin that stole her breath. The men Daisy usually dated were intellectuals, professors, and the like. She had never been attracted to the earthy works with his hands type. Until today. But she wasn't here for a holiday fling. Reaching into her purse, she extracted a 20-pound note. "I'm running out of time. Are you above being bribed?" Ian kept his face straight with difficulty. The urge to laugh was almost overpowering. "I wouldn't feel right," he said, "about taking your money. My expenses are being covered, and you'd be doing me a huge favor." Daisy grasped his hand in both of hers and curled his fingers around the bill. At that moment, everything changed. Because Ms. Daisy Wexler had the softest, most delicate touch Ian had ever felt. Immediately, his mind conjured up wicked, unexpected scenarios of him and Daisy frolicking in bed, naked, with those slender fingers wrapped around his. Bloody hell. He cleared his throat, stepping back half a stride, all amusement vaporized by the blasting surge of lust that threatened to bring him to his knees. No longer touching her, he strove to regain his senses. Dukes did not frolic particularly with strangers. Therein lay the path to ruin. This woman was dangerous. And yet Ian had never wanted to be a duke. He was a man too, damn it. And this man didn't want to let Daisy go just yet. The money in his hand burned his skin. Without second-guessing his actions, he stuffed it in her tote, taking care not to make contact with her in any way. "If it means that much to you, I'll see what I can do." The brilliance of her smile almost blinded him. "Thank you," she cried, reaching out to hug him. For a brief moment, her small breasts mashed against his chest. Flyaway, sunshiny hair teased his lips. The fragrance of rose petals assailed his nostrils. It was everything he could manage not to bend her over his arm and kiss her senseless. Instead, he did the right thing, a lamentable characteristic of Wolffhampton dukes through the ages. He straightened his spine and held her at arm's length. "We Brits are not as chummy at first meeting as you Yanks," he said laconically. "No need for an overabundance of gratitude. You'll likely not leave here with what you want, so don't expect too much." Releasing her reluctantly, he bent and picked up a pail of hog feed, using it as armor. Perhaps the ridiculous state of his love life was to blame for his aberrant behavior. "But you'll help me!" The anxiety on her face made him squirm inwardly. He was not by nature a duplicitous man, but he'd waded into a deep pit of muddy intentions, and the climb out was a slippery slope, one that would surely mean the end of any encounters with Daisy Wexler. He nodded, wanting to do anything to coax that warm, wonderful smile out of hiding again. "I'll try. Tell me more about why you're here." Wide-spaced sapphire eyes regarded him with suspicion. He fancied that her chin tilted skyward a centimeter or two. "I don't think I should be gossiping about the Duke's private affairs," she said stiffly. "I'm sure he would appreciate my discretion. I'm sure he would appreciate peeling the clothes from your body like the skin of a ripe peach and sucking your—" Sweat broke out on Ian's forehead. Thank God his trousers were fashioned of thick corduroy, or else this sylph of a woman would be shocked to see that he was hard as a steel spike. At that moment, Daisy couldn't care less about her mission. She was far more entranced with the way the stranger's eyes had shone hot with desire before he deliberately reined it in and pretended to ignore the sizzle in the air. Daisy was not particularly experienced, but she recognized hunger when she saw it. This tough, rugged man with muddy boots and elegant hands wanted her. The knowledge excited her. Daisy was not the kind of woman who drove men to do wild things. She was a good organizer, a decent cook, and a damned fine researcher. But she was neither seductive nor sexy. That wasn't self-pity speaking. She merely knew her own limitations. But this man saw her differently. Suddenly, she wished she had worn a more alluring outfit than a comfy cotton dress that traveled well. Nibbling her bottom lip for half a second, she blurted out a most un-Daisy-like invitation. "Would you have dinner with me tonight after I meet with the Duke?" This stranger really would think she was a pushy forward American if she kept this up. "My treat," she said hastily, once again assessing the worn state of the man's attire. His throat and face flushed. A noticeable bulge tinted the front of his pants. "Dear Lord." Daisy blushed as well, feeling hot and shaky and wonderfully excited. Suddenly, she had a vision of the two of them hidden away in a hay-filled barn, Daisy riding astride this man's impressive, impossible-to-miss. "I'll have to take a rain check," he said gruffly. "Perhaps another time." The gentle rebuff curdled her stomach. She rarely put herself out there, and this was why. He had shot her down, albeit gently, but nevertheless a slap in the face. Gathering her tattered composure, she ignored the way her eyes stung and her throat closed up. "Very well. I only wanted to show my gratitude for your assistance." She heard her prissy words and realized that she had unwittingly picked up some of his Tony accent. Glancing at her watch to disguise the fact that she was near tears, she took a deep breath. "If it's not too much of a bother, would you please go in and ask if he will see me?" The man with the dark amber eyes and the face of a Roman conqueror did not smile as he took a step closer and with one finger reached out to wipe a damp stain from the corner of her lashes. "You're a lovely woman, Ms. Daisy Wexler. I'll do what I can." His hand lingered, cupping her cheek. "Where are you staying while you're here?" She nodded over her shoulder to the view of a placid Lake Windermere glistening in the distance. The water was a deep, mysterious cerulean beneath the noonday sun. Barely a whitecap or a ripple disturbed the broad expanse. "Ambleside, the youth hostel across the way." He nodded, his expression almost grim. "Come back in an hour. If the Duke is available, I'll ask him to speak with you." Disconsolate and bereft, Daisy watched the man stride toward the enormous, unwieldy castle that was more regal than prepossessing. He disappeared around the side where the stables adjoined the house. She had no idea if he would really plead her case, and she wanted badly to simply walk up the tree-lined path and knock on the door. But something held her in check, perhaps his unflattering assessment of her fellow Americans as pushy. If this man and the Duke expected docility and compliance, she would try to be patient. After all, her mission was important not only for the ones who had sent her, but for Daisy personally. The Duke's ancestral home sat on a rocky hill overlooking the lake. Beyond and to the left, a second outcropping rose against the sky, beckoning the adventurous to follow. She had time to kill and a fascination for exploration, so Daisy set off toward it. The weather was perfect for touring, and briefly she regretted that she wasn't in England for a simple holiday. But too much was at stake to goof off now. If her work went well, she would be able to enjoy a few days of legitimate vacation and settle a few questions of her own before she returned to the States. The climb was steeper than it appeared, and Daisy was breathing hard when she reached the crest, her calf muscles protesting the unaccustomed trek. But the view from the top was stunning. Pastoral Britain in all its glory lay spread out at her feet. Gambolling sheep meandering stone fences, fluffy clouds dotting an azure sky, and green as far as the eye could see, verdant emerald meadows marked off in neat patchwork squares. Savoring the warmth of the sun, she kicked off her shoes, feeling like a schoolchild out for the summer. In her tote, she found a thin old shawl that she kept with her for just such an occasion. Spreading it over the lush grass, she sat down with her arms encircling her knees. If she half closed her eyes and ignored the few marks of civilization, she could almost imagine that she lived in a different age a day when warriors strode across the land, stealing women and taking them away to pagan lands. A shiver worked its way down her spine as she thought of her accomplice. It occurred to her then that she had not even asked his name. But somehow the anonymity of their highly charged encounter added a touch of anticipation to her return to the castle later in the day. Perhaps when she met with the Duke, she could probe indirectly for information about the man who must surely have some level of responsibility for the upkeep of the estate. The longer Daisy sat on the grass, the more her earlier exhaustion overtook her. She smoothed the edges of the shawl to its fullest width and lay back her hand beneath her cheek. All she needed was to relax and soak up a bit more sun. Then she would be fresh for her meeting with the Duke. Ian tracked Daisy's progress up the hill. He knew exactly where she stopped to rest. It was a measure of his intense preoccupation with his lovely, uninvited guest that he felt not a single shred of guilt for observing her with a pair of expensive, high-powered binoculars. He watched as she stretched out on the ground and closed her eyes. The sight hit him hard in the chest, stealing his breath and making him yearn. He wanted to be there beside her, over her, in her. But the chances of that happening were as remote as finding a leprechaun's pot of gold. Magnified in the lenses, Daisy slept, her hand curled beneath her cheek in innocent relaxation. But the female he was spying upon without compunction was surely no babe in the woods. She had curves in all the right places, and her smooth, creamy skin and full pink lips lured a man into contemplating not only indiscretion, but out-and-out recklessness. Before his noble lineage had become a millstone around his neck, he would have been free to follow such an attraction wherever it led. Now life wasn't so simple. He had told her to come back in an hour, but his patience to be with her again lasted only half that long. Walking around the other side of the hill and to its top was no strain at all. He'd clambered over these acres many times as a boy. Though he was not particularly silent in his approach, Daisy never moved. As he neared her, he saw that her lips were parted and a wispy curl had fallen across her cheek. She had wound the silky strands of her hair into a loose knot at the back of her head, but the windy day had wreaked havoc with her attempt to appear businesslike. He knelt beside her and brushed the errant locks off her face before trailing his fingers down the soft skin of her neck to her arm. "Daisy, are you awake?" She stirred fretfully, her nose scrunched up in a frown. "I am now." She sat up yawning. "What did he say?" "Who?" She lifted an incredulous eyebrow as if questioning his mental competence. "The Duke, of course." His machinations weighed heavily upon his soul, but he wanted selfishly to be himself for a bit longer. "He's away from the house right now, but he'll be home soon." "Shouldn't you be working?" Her question caught him off guard. "I've been up since 6 o'clock, he said truthfully. "And I'll put in a few more hours this afternoon." Not tending animals, of course, but instead combing through piles of paper, wondering if he would ever find a palatable answer to the impossible Gordian knot that was his duty-filled life. Daisy sighed, looking at him with artless supplication. "Do you think you can convince him to see me?" Ian sprawled out beside her on the grass, reclining on an elbow. Tugging at her wrist, he coaxed her onto her back so that he was half leaning over her. Daisy's clear blue eyes were filled with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. He traced a finger over her bottom lip, aware that he was treading a fine line between personal indulgence and a gentleman's honor. But he knew from experience that behaving according to his station was often no fun at all. He lowered his head slowly, giving her a chance to protest. "I'll do my best," he promised, his voice husky. "But in the meantime, I'm going to kiss you." Daisy's breathing slowed, her heart beating loudly in her ears as the English stranger bent to kiss her. She loved that he didn't ask permission. Modern men were too amenable. This arrogant, boldly masculine man seemed like a throwback to an earlier generation, and it only made her anticipate his kiss more. She rubbed her fingertips over his sculpted chin, feeling a slight trace of stubble. "I don't even know your name. Is that an observation or a complaint?" His crooked grin reminded her of a pirate. He was so close she could smell the warm fragrance of his skin. "Are you going to tell me what it is?" Now his lips hovered over hers, his breath mingling with her almost silent whimper of need. "I could but—"
"Do you want reality or fantasy? Your choice." Daisy.
It would not have surprised her at all to feel the earth tremble beneath them. Her world was shifting on its axis, revealing facets of her personality that shocked and excited her. She was Daisy Wexler, a librarian from Virginia. She did not play tonsil hockey in broad daylight with smug, audacious strangers, but perhaps she didn't know herself at all. "Fantasy," she breathed. "Kiss me before I change my mind." His mouth was warm and firm, the press of his lips an immaculate blend of hunger and tenderness. "Daisy," he muttered. "Daisy." The way he groaned the syllables made her melt. Her arms encircled his neck, her hands unashamedly measuring the width of his shoulders, the tensile strength of sleek muscles beneath warm skin. He was everything she was not, hard and virile, supremely confident in his sexuality. "I like the way you smell," she whispered. "It's very English." He chuckled, the sound reverberating against her breast. "You smell like sin, Miss Daisy Wexler. I think you're a seductress disguised as an innocent American tourist. You've come across the pond to lure unsuspecting Englishmen to their doom." "Doom," she gasped as his hand closed over her breast. "That's not a very nice thing to say, but accurate." He buried his face in her neck as he stroked her through thin layers of cloth, his big body trembling violently. "What are you doing to me? She felt the press of his erection against her thigh. It had never been her intent to offer more than a kiss. But their embrace had segued from delightful to desperate need at warp speed. Between her legs, the practical cotton undies she'd purchased 6 to a pack were damp. She wanted him in ways she had never wanted anyone before. The ferocity of the craving stunned and terrified her. Was this the kind of sexual madness that made fools of women, that left them broken-hearted in its wake? To have this man in her arms, wild with passion for her, was the ultimate temptation. This beautiful, well-spoken, engaging man needed her as much as she needed him. But one last functioning brain cell told her to get up, to walk away, to remember why she was here. "Stop," she said. "Let me up. I came here to see the Duke." "Be bugger the Duke." Ian froze, wondering if he had said that last bit out loud. Lifting his body away from Daisy's slowly, he tried to regulate his breathing and regain the control that was expected of him. When he could manage it, he got to his feet. There was nothing he could do about the state of his sex. It was too big to hide and too painfully swollen to simply pretend nothing had happened. He could barely breathe. Daisy seemed shocked by what she saw, which made him rather angry, truth be told. Did she seriously not realize how close they had come to carnal relations? A few seconds more, and she would have found her skirt pushed up to her waist and her knickers dragged down to her. Damnation! He turned his back and bent forward, putting his hands on his knees. After taking several labored gulps of air, he finally managed to regain a modicum of equilibrium. But still, he couldn't face her. He inhaled sharply and spoke with his back still to her. "The Duke should be home any moment." he said curtly. I'll go now and determine whether or not he can meet with you this afternoon. From behind his shoulder, Daisy spoke, her voice subdued. That's very kind of you. I'm sorry that He whirled, cursing his own weakness. He should have sent her on her way immediately. That you what? She stood up as well, and with her arms wrapped around her waist, she was the picture of discomfort. That I let you think I was willing to, fool around. Is that what you Americans call it? He scowled. How many euphemisms can you invent for having sex? Daisy frowned. I was trying to be polite. I don't feel particularly polite at the moment, he growled. Merely looking at her all disheveled and alluring was getting him revved up again. I feel more like finishing what we started. When she opened her mouth to speak, he put a hand over her lips. Don't worry, he said roughly. I'm clear now on your priorities. You want to see the Duke. Daisy grasped his wrist and pulled his hand away, her pretty eyes beseeching him to understand. You're a lovely man, she whispered. But I was sent here for a very important reason. I can't allow myself to get sidetracked. They must be paying you a lot of money to purchase such devotion. She flushed, visibly wounded by his sarcasm. Money isn't the issue. He stepped away, unaccountably depressed. Money is always the issue, he said bluntly. Is that how you judge people, by the money they have? I would think a man in your position might have a more democratic outlook on life. A man in my position, she shrugged awkwardly. Someone who works with his hands. Damn, everything she said made him think of sex. He, the only remaining male scion of the House of Wolffhampton, had come perilously close to shagging a perfect stranger in broad daylight. Good Lord, clearly it was time to end this. Goodbye, Miss Daisy Wexler. I hope you find everything you're looking for. Though the day was still sunny and clear, a cloud settled over Daisy's emotions. Watching the handsome stranger descend the hill with long, loping strides made her want to weep for some unaccountable reason. She'd likely never see him again, unless she happened to run across him as she was leaving the Duke's estate. Though given his current mood, he'd probably hide out until she was gone. In theory, Daisy was not opposed to a holiday romance, particularly with a man who sounded like one of her favorite British actors, but was far more blatantly virile and sexually intense. A vacation fling was not in essence a mistake. But Daisy was not on a vacation. She was employed, and that employment was going to enable a project of her own, one that could change her life. Glancing down at her watch, she surmised that enough time had elapsed to warrant approaching the enormous fortress-like house. She tromped down the incline across the meadow, up the tree-lined path, and onto a stone apron that fanned out from the gigantic oak doors. The ornate iron knockers looked ancient. Palms damp, she reached out a hand, grasped one of the heavy circlets, and rapped it 3 times. In her imagination, the sound reverberated inside the house. Shifting from one foot to the other, she waited. The interval was no more than a few seconds, but it might as well have been eons. At last, the door swung open and an older man clad in the traditional garb of a butler greeted her with a slight inclination of his head. Good day, Mum. Daisy hesitated, abashed at his formality. My name is Daisy Wexler. I'm here to speak to the Duke. She thought about mentioning her go-between, but decided against it. As she fidgeted, the major domo assessed her rumpled clothing and lack of transportation. I will see if His Grace is ready for visitors, he said stiffly. Perhaps you'll be so kind as to wait in the parlor. Daisy perched on a cushioned settee that looked as if it might have supported the fannies of knights and ladies down through the ages. Her heart rapped against her ribs, and her knees felt like jelly even though she was seated. She'd flown across an ocean to request information from a duke, and until this very moment, she hadn't actually contemplated what form such a conversation might take. Perhaps she should have rehearsed. Under normal circumstances, she never had any trouble with shyness. But even for someone reared on the precepts of equality, for all the idea of actually meeting nobility was daunting. Her throat was completely dry by the time the starchy retainer returned to fetch her. The man looked down his nose, or so it seemed to Daisy. "He will see you now." Daisy followed her escort along one hallway and then another. To call this place a house was a misnomer. Castle was the more correct term. It was surely next to impossible to adequately heat the enormous chambers with their vaulted ceilings and stone floors. Finally, the butler halted in front of a set of double doors. Grasping both knobs and pulling them open with ceremony, he stepped aside and spoke to someone beyond Daisy's line of sight. "Ms. Daisy Wexler, to see you, Your Grace." Again, her knees trembled. Glancing at the servant beside her, she found neither sympathy nor assistance in his blank gaze. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she entered the room. For a moment, awe overtook her. The chamber in which she found herself was like something out of a movie. Enormous, mullioned windows shone in the afternoon sun. Though the glass was immaculate, millions of dust motes danced in the beams of light, no doubt courtesy of the heavy gold brocade and crimson velvet draperies that flanked the wavy antique panes. A priceless oriental rug, faded but lovely, lay on the floor beneath her feet, adding to the impression of old money and exquisite taste. As a librarian, she couldn't help but also be impressed by the walls of bookcases laden with leather-bound volumes. But before she could do more than glance at them, something else, or rather, someone caught her eye. The man had his back to her, his gaze trained on the view beyond the curved bank of windows. Standing behind an impressive antique desk, the silent figure projected an air of absolute authority. Suppressing an insane desire to curtsy, Daisy moved into the room, hoping to see him more clearly. Framed as he was in the alcove, the sun blinded her. As she walked toward him, expecting him to speak at any moment, she took stock of her host. He wore a navy suit, obviously hand-tailored to fit his broad-shouldered, lanky frame. Dark brown hair showed evidence of dampness, as if he had showered recently. The faint, pleasant scent of aftershave lingered in the air. Her toes curled in her canvas espadrilles. Curiosity and anticipation warred with nervousness in her stomach. "Thank you for meeting with me," she said quietly. "I'd like to ask you some questions, if I may." "Be seated." The words were low and terse, barely audible. Feeling like a recalcitrant schoolgirl, she glanced at the choice of seats on her left and right before deciding on a Louis XIV needlepoint chair. Unfortunately, it was more impressive than comfortable. She squirmed to settle herself, set her tote on the floor, and took out a pad and pen. Laying them on the edge of the highly polished escritoire, she sat back and folded her hands in her lap. The silence lengthened and deepened. "Your Grace." Perhaps her verbal prompt was considered a social faux pas because those wide, impressive shoulders stiffened. "Patience is not really an American virtue, is it?" He said, the syllables curt and aristocratic. Something about that gravelly but cultured voice raked across Daisy's nerves like a kitten's claw on silk. She swallowed hard, unable to speak. Finally, the Duke turned around to face her. Daisy's breathing stumbled. "You," she cried, "you're the Duke